Welcome to episode 197 of Silver Lining for Learning. And I am Yong Zhao from University of Kansas, one of the co-hosts. And we have co-host Chris Didi from Harvard, co-host Punya Mishra from Arizona State University. And we also have co-host Kurt Bunk from Indiana University, and he's joining us by phone. And very fortunately today, we have a guest from Africa. Even though a Silver Lining for Learning has been trying to capture innovations in every part of the world, and we have done so, we have not had an episode on e-learning in Africa for a long time. So today, we're very fortunate to have Ambassador Rudo, we have Rebecca, we have Ify and Paul, and they represent different countries and also the continent of Africa about e-learning in the post-COVID time. E-learning has been evolving a lot and has been used a lot. So today, we welcome our host, we welcome our guest, and hope that we will learn a lot about this. So this is an episode about e-learning in post-COVID Africa. Why don't we get started with I think let's start with maybe Rebecca. You want to get started by introducing yourself and the work, and then we'll go to Rebecca, to Ify, to Paul, to Ambassador Rudo before we ask any questions. And of course, during the time, if anyone has any questions, feel free to ask. Let's start with Rebecca. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Rebecca Stromeyer, and I'm the founder of eLearning Africa. I understand I should talk a little bit about the history of it, in terms of how I came, because I'm not African. I'm half German, half Australian, and I grew up internationally. But I started off in e-learning with a conference I launched in 1995 called Online Educa Berlin, and that's where I met Kurt many, many years ago. I can't remember when it was, but it was, I think, at least 10 years ago. And so my career started in organizing events and working in the field of education. But it was mainly international education. It was language learning for business training, etc. And I started with a first edition of a language fair, which I organized in Berlin, and then subsequently in Eastern Europe. And then I continued with international education fairs about students, traveling abroad to study in other countries. And I hosted a conference in Moscow in the early 90s. And that's where the idea for an online learning conference came, was when I had the Russian military join this conference, and they said, look, we want to talk about using our satellite dishes that we no longer use because the Soviet Union had collapsed by that time. Maybe I'm not allowed to use that word of collapse, but the Soviet Union had disintegrated, and they had the CIS countries, which are still connected, and they had these satellite dishes that they were had used for other purposes, and thought about using them for education with the different Soviet states, or the former Soviet states, because they had a lingua franca. So it made sense to use it for educational purpose. And that's how the idea came to do a conference in Berlin, which was basically in the middle of East and West, and to bring the global community to Berlin from all sectors. And so the focus was always having all sectors involved: the academic sector, the K-12 sector, but also the public sector, the government sector, and also the workplace learning sector. In those days, it was very early days, and you had CD-ROMs, etc. And where it was happening was mainly in the defense industry, and also maybe in the workplace sector, or in the defense industry. Actually had simulations and e-learning. So this became an annual conference. I then did offshoots of it in the 90s in Singapore and Korea, a bit too early for the time. And then I started one for Spain and Latin America. And it was the biggest conference that brought both the Spanish and the Spanish-speaking Latin American community together. And in 2003, I realized, seeing initiatives with the glass fiber lines being placed in public-private partnerships to support internet across Africa, I saw the potential for the education industry with access to knowledge. And so I played around with the idea for quite some time. I wasn't sure. I thought of bringing the African community to the main global conference, OEB. But then realized that Africa is such a big continent with so many different contexts, so many different countries, so many different languages, that it needed its own conference. And I decided to do a one-off conference in Ethiopia in 2006. I launched in 2005, organized the first one in 2006. And it was just supposed to be one conference. I expected 400 people, and we had 850 people join for that first edition. I never looked back basically, but it was such fun. It was such a great community that I decided to host it annually, and also to host it annually in a different country each year. So it's been taking place has had 17 editions. We had a COVID interruption, and it's taking place across different countries in Eastern, Southern, North Africa, West Africa, in both Francophone and Anglophone countries. And when we started, and I think my time's probably up. When we started, it was before the time of social media, before the time people were connected through LinkedIn and Facebook, before the African community was so interconnected the way they are today. Obviously, the internet has moved so far. So at that time, not that many Africans working in the same field were that connected, due to just where we were. And I think the same can be said for other countries as well. And so now, of course, there's far more Pan-African collaboration due to also conference such as e-learning Africa, which also helped to create a community of practice, but also the way everything has evolved. And of course, then there's also been a pre-COVID and a post-COVID era, but I'll stop here.
Okay, who wants to go next? I was thinking about maybe Ify, you want to go?
Okay, so thank you so much for having me. Really excited to be here amongst great minds. I'm Obidi-Essien, an education technology consultant, a Microsoft Global Training Partner, and the founder of Tech Savvy Teacher International. I would say that the company I run is actually my life. It expresses who I am as a teacher. Well, I started teaching 10 years ago, over a decade now, and it was fun. It was interesting. But at first, it was not as interesting as that, because when you talk about teaching in Africa, it's not really a respected profession. So I was in denial for some time, but it was my second teaching practice. I just fell in love with the profession, and I said, you know what? I'm here for the long run. This is where I'm called to be. And since then, I've been finding purpose in teaching, in education. And I taught different classes, and I noticed that there was a gap. There was a gap in learning, having pupils, learning at different paces and being, stereotyped as, children who were not academically sound. I felt there was a need. I felt there was a void. And that was where my research kick-started. And today I'm able to drive digital transformation within and outside Nigeria. Yes, and that's because I was able to ensure that teachers automate instruction. By automate, I mean students are able to control their learning. Children are able to control the way, they receive knowledge. And that was just the game changer in all of this. I remember our first training on technology. That was in 2017. I literally saw teachers shaking, and they were really afraid. And they asked me, what software is this? I've never heard of this before. What is this? And I said, look, technology is not as hard as it sounds. You as a teacher can leverage technology in your teaching, because it would bring about, the desired learning outcome in our students. And that's how we, started. It was brilliant. It was transformational. And we started seeing real impact in education. We started seeing real impact. And we had these trainings in different parts of Nigeria and even in beyond. I remember our masterclass, hosted in Dubai. That was in 2020. And we talked about the flipped classroom. And we talked about how this is causing, digital transformation across developed countries. And guess what? Just when we got back to Nigeria, the COVID pandemic struck. And you know what? All the school owners who were with us were able to navigate the COVID-19 period and stay successful. They were able to, transform learning beyond the four walls of the classroom. And that was where we started seeing real transformation in education. So we've been very honored to have impacted the education sector, raised a lot of tech savvy teachers, because we we saw that it was not enough, to invest in the technology, but it's very crucial to upskill the drivers of technology with digital skills. And that was how, till today, we are doing so much in that regard. And we are able to ensure that students and teachers are leveraging technology in education across Africa. I'm a mother of 3 amazing toddlers, and I can say for sure that leveraging technology in education is not just, it should be a choice, but it should be a necessity in this digital era. It has to be. Like, this is the era of technology, and we just have to make it work. I know that there are so many constraints, there are so many limitations when it comes to technology integration, talking about internet connectivity, talking about, access to these technologies. But when there is a will, there is a way. Thank you.
Thank you, Ify. Thank you very much. Paul, you want to follow Ify to do a brief introduction of yourself and the situation you want to chat about in Africa?
Yes, thank you very much for this invitation on this podcast. My name is Paul Birevu Muyinda. I work at Makerere University as a professor of open distance and e-learning. And I can assure you that my journey in e-learning actually started from way back in e-learning Africa in 2006. Okay, that is another story we can tell later on, but I do have background or background of statistics, computer science, and then education. At Makerere University, I work with the Institute of Open Distance and E-Learning. And this institute is responsible for actually nurturing the growth and the design of e-learning in Makerere University, in the entire university. So we have been running distance education programs, and later on in the COVID-19 era, we kind of cascaded distance education approaches to the entire university. But the uptake of e-learning at Makerere University and in universities in Uganda prior to the COVID-19 times could be said to be lukewarm. But we've been promoting distance education, e-learning in Makerere University and even beyond in the country. So this journey has not been easy, but indeed we are moving with it, and we are gaining a lot of successes in the journey of e-learning in Makerere and many other institutions within Uganda and across Africa. So in this self-introduction, I just wanted to tell you that, yes, I am an e-learning specialist who is also the director of the Institute of Open Distance and E-Learning. The rest of the conversations, we can be able to go on with them. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. And we have Ambassador Rudo, and you want to introduce yourself as well? Thank you.
Thank you so much. And excuse my being wrapped up. It's very cold here. This is winter in Southern Africa. So the temperatures are around 14 degrees. I have always been an adult educator and started my career in terms of adult education, raising awareness on women's rights, doing skills development for women and out-of-school girls, doing resilience training for communities at different levels. And then I graduated to doing capacity building for civil society within East and Southern Africa, which I did for quite a long time, developing training materials, developing manuals on in different areas of NGO management, policy, advocacy, and things that strengthened capacities of NGOs. I then went into diplomacy and was lucky to be made permanent delegate at UNESCO. So I was in my field of work. And there in one of the years, I was the chair of the Africa group. And we also looked at taking advantage of Priority Africa at UNESCO, as Africa is one of the priorities of UNESCO, and looking at what were those aspects of training that were key for Africa, particularly vocational and training and technical training was one of the areas that was identified. And then also looking at using new technology for training and not just relying on face-to-face training, but adopting technologies for training. And that was the technological turnaround that I then had. I later joined the board of the UNESCO Institute for Lifelong Learning, on which I still sit, in which we promote lifelong learning, not just as a policy, but also looking at lifelong learning among cities and looking at the cities and local authorities as centers for lifelong learning. And I know in Africa, many cities were centers of lifelong learning and had a lot of lifelong learning and provided lifelong learning opportunities for citizens. I am now the permanent secretary, which is the head of the Ministry for Skills Development, Skills Audit and Development. And one of my key tasks is to remind people that during COVID, we used successfully online learning. And the fact that COVID is gone, that technology and that innovation should not just be dropped, but should now be integrated within our teaching system, as well as in the training of our teachers, so that teachers now use online learning as a methodology for teaching. My responsibilities also go into looking at changing mindsets into really realizing this is the digital age and the need for adopting technologies, not just technologies for industry, but technologies for teaching and learning, and looking at educational technology, one of my areas of interest. And I remember I was very interested in the work that they are doing in educational technology, because teacher training has changed and should therefore change. Looking at employability skills, looking at innovation in education, as well as developing. We have successfully now managed to change the educational curriculum so that the technical pathways are recognized. We were very academically oriented as a country, and now starting from next year, there will be pathways for the technically oriented. We are also beginning to downstream the digitalization to the public, and ensuring that there is universal access. I learned a lot at the eLearning Africa, and I have been implementing different things that I learned at the conference. It was very, very useful for me. So this is me. I am an educator and a learner.
Thank you, Ambassador. And I know we have other guests who have joined the Zoom as well, but I think we want to ask some questions. So Chris, you want to go forward with your question?
I do, and thanks to all of you for the work that you're doing. What I find most impressive is two things. One is that the approach that you describe is very systemic. You're not just having a distance education conference or a policy conference or a infrastructure conference, but it brings together all the different kinds of stakeholders. We see this in just your group, and that's so important in really addressing something as complex as e-learning. But the other thing that I find really impressive is that it's a whole continent, and it's not a continent like Antarctica. It's a big continent with many, many different nations. And I don't think there's another region of the world that is addressing e-learning on the level of a continent. And yet it makes so much sense. It makes so much sense to do that. There's a power in scale, there's a power in multiple perspectives, and so on. So I do have a question, having told you about things that impress me. We had two programs in the last year prior to this one that relate. One, episode 169 was about the MENA region, the Middle East, Northern Africa region, and episode 156 was about preparing children in Africa for a fast-changing world. And I forget which episode this came up, but one of the things that has been a barrier to e-learning in many parts of the world is having reliable electricity, because advances in technology and mobile devices have certainly helped with delivery of e-learning, but of course, reliable electricity, internet remain as infrastructure issues. And one of our guests said, well, that's not really much of a problem anymore. He said, because of solar power. People are putting solar power generators at the village level, and it's just transforming everything. And the village can become self-sufficient in ways that was never possible before. So I have sort of a two-part question. One of them is are you seeing new technologies that are really overcoming some of the historic barriers to e-learning in Africa? And the other is, are there still some of those historic barriers that really pose challenges, especially in rural areas or with marginalized groups?
I think solar energy has really been revolutionary, and people have mobile devices all over the place, including areas that never had electricity. So in fact, the problem of electricity was lack of access, not unreliable electricity. It was never there. And now they do have access to electricity from solar power. What I find as a problem in Zimbabwe is very expensive data. The cost of internet data is still very, very high, and therefore becomes a big barrier for online learning, even for students. Online learning is, the cost is prohibitive. And we are trying to look at how do you create universal access? How do you create cheaper data? But that is not yet in place. But that is something that we have recognized as a major, major stumbling block.
Yes, I think I can be able to supplement on what Ambassador has said. Yes, solar power in Africa is indeed coming in to support rural areas that were hitherto inaccessible in terms of electricity. And the proliferation of mobile devices is also coming in as another tool that many institutions and many children and many students are using to access learning resources, to access education. But the issue of connectivity or data, internet data, actually many governments are thinking around it and creating some innovations around it. For example, in our country, in Uganda, for education data, institutions are discussing with the telecom service providers to zero rate educational services, so that when you are accessing sites that provide educational resources, they are zero rated, and you don't need to have internet data on your device for as long as you're accessing that. So that kind of innovation and many other innovations that are coming up are actually pushing down the cost of access to educational resources. Thank you.
Okay. I'd like to add something here. I remember in one of the trainings we had for teachers, we were able to see how teachers who had access to mobile devices were able to automate instruction. And they were really surprised on how much potential their mobile devices had without having the laptops and the computers, right? And we leveraged the mobile apps and taught them how to use free and accessible mobile applications to create custom, impactful content for their students. And these contents can be accessed offline without internet, right? These videos could be accessed offline. So it did not completely take away the limitation, but it helped to a great extent, right? To minimize the use of to minimize the use of internet, connectivity. So I believe that was one of the ways, we were able to drive digital transformation, in our country as well. And I believe the solar energy, very, transformational, but I think it's still very, very, very expensive, because I've talked with a lot of school leaders in the private sector, and this is a huge factor for them. It's expensive, and they may not be able to afford this for their institution. While it's a transformative idea, it can only be a solution, I believe, when the government steps in here. So I believe that's, why we need collaboration from the public and private sector. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Yiffy, and thank you, Ambassador Rudo and Paul. And Kurt has joined us. Kurt, you have a question. Go ahead.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, you look good. Your computer is back and you're back.
The computer is back. So here's the thing, everybody. Back in the day, we get the blue screen of death, and then you don't know what to do, but the tech people tell you, hit the escape button, and you'll get in. Well, that training for decades and decades of blue screen of death training came in handy just now because I hit the escape key and I got in. So there you go. Lesson 101 in using technology. Escape. Escape and you shall survive. So I'm glad I'm delighted to be with all of you today after setting this show up. And hi to Rebecca. I have a question for the three guests from different parts of Africa. I really appreciate people coming in from Uganda and Zimbabwe, and to have people share with us their stories. It's exciting to see all of you here, and you all get in at the same time. So, and as well as Rwanda. We have three people from three different sectors on purpose. So Rebecca and I set this up so we can hear from K-12 people, and Iffy will talk from K-12 perspective, and Paul from a higher ed perspective, and the ambassador from the governmental perspective. So I think I'm going to ask two different questions. I'll ask Rebecca questions after the three of them answer my first question. I don't know what you've said so far, Rebecca, and how you introduced yourself, but I want to have you have a chance to do so again with me here a little bit. So my question is, what's exciting you about training with technology, in particular e-learning or blended learning, or whatever, or AI? What has helped in terms of training K-12 students, Iffy, in terms of training higher education or adult students? And the next show we're going to have is on adult learners, by the way. We're going to take a break off for 4th of July week here. But in 2 weeks, we'll talk about attracting adult learners. So, Paul, what kinds of tools and technologies are you using to upskill and reskill university students? What's gotten you really excited today? And then the ambassador, from a governmental perspective in Zimbabwe and across the whole region and the whole country, what kinds of things are people talking about in governmental arenas and conferences and summits? So I think we'll start with K-12 with Iffy. What are the things that are exciting teachers, kids, and so forth for online skills training? What's the new big thing there? Oh, you're muted, Iffy. You're muted.
Okay, yeah, thank you so much, Curtis, and it's great to see you. I would start from a personal experience that led me to train teachers, K-12 teachers. So I was just creating a video from the comfort of my room, and I decided to upload this video on YouTube. This was years back, like 7 years ago, and I uploaded this video on YouTube and made it public, right? And 2 months after that, a child in grade 6 just came into my house and she was just excited. Oh, I learned how to multiply by 9 after watching your video. I learned, and she was so excited. And I was speechless, actually. I didn't really understand the potential of that video I uploaded. And it just got me thinking to say, okay, this child was able to access my content from the comfort of her home and learn at her pace and automate that control, have control over her learning in such a way that she could repeat knowledge over and over and over again until retention is possible, is achieved. And that was just transformational for me. And I told myself, what if every child is able to control the way they learn, is able to control the pace at which they learn? Because, the pace of learning is actually what brings about the learning challenges in the classroom. So one child learns at a different pace, another child learns totally differently, and they are all expected to bring about the same learning outcome. No, that's impossible. That's so impossible. And so when you are able to create an audiovisual content as a teacher, you are able to customize and personalize learning, and you are able to give control to that student to learn at that pace in such a way that the child is able to, operate from her highest or his highest potential. And a lot of times within the limitations of the physical classroom, teachers are not able to see that at work. But when teaching goes beyond the four walls of the classroom, a lot of transformative learning can take place. A lot can just happen. And that was what led me to start the Tech Savvy Teacher Masterclass. And it has been revolutionary. Teachers are excited to know that students who are not feeling well or who miss classes for some reason or the other will not be left out at the end of the day. They can have access to these learning without missing a day, right? So, they're also excited because, authoring tools like Canva, right, are used to create creative and customized context-based, content for students. So they're really excited because most of these tools have the free trial version. So when you talk about financial constraints using technology, it's not there anymore because I have the opportunity to leverage the free trial of these, mobile apps, So I believe that has just been a game changer. I remember just recently, I was talking to a school owner who, who sent her teachers to my training 4 years ago. And she said, Ify, your training was so impactful that right now, every teacher creates content, digital content, and we upload that content on our school portal, right? On our school learning management software, and children are able to access this content. I was really excited, not because we actually provided that service, but because of the impact, that it will have on the children that they teach. So it's really exciting, and we hope to leverage the benefit of AI even in digital content creation. Thank you, Kurt.
It's moving beyond the four walls, right? So, I've been writing about this for decades. So is Chris, so is Punya, so is Young. And we're happy and delighted to hear your answer there. I have a book called The World is Open. I'll try and get that to you somehow. We'll talk after the show. Paul, you want to jump in from a higher ed perspective?
Yeah. To answer your question on what is exciting, especially in higher education institutions, we all know very well that unlike in secondary schools and primary schools or K-12, in higher education institutions, the teachers that teach there or the faculty members that teach there in most of the African countries are retained because they have a first class or they have a second upper class degree or they have a very good degree. So they are retained to teach, but they do not have the pedagogical skills to teach. So for us, what's exciting as we train our teachers is that we take them through the pedagogical angle and they realize their weaknesses. They say, I think I've been doing the wrong thing. I didn't know how to teach. But through the instructional design that we give them in designing their courses, they get excited about teaching and they say, teaching can be made easier. And so this has excited them as much as possible. So you find them actually saying now, how can I be able to instructionally design my course so that I can be able to feel the teaching? So they are now feeling that they are teaching. Previously, they were not because they didn't know actually what teaching entailed. But now with the interventions we are giving them in training them how to develop their courses, we do provide pedagogical skills that are enabling them to teach very well. Then also what's exciting them is the test they had during the COVID-19. They realized that, I can teach without actually being present in the classroom. I can teach my students. My students can be able to engage with my materials, even at night time, even when I'm not around. So, and many professors, as you know, they travel a lot. They travel a lot for conferences, for consultancies, and so on. So they keep their students engaged, and this is exciting them very well. Now, what has helped in terms of training, of course, what we have realized has helped us a lot is government support. When government came in to support and say, yes, you can use this as an alternative approach to teaching and learning, you see all institutions embraced. And also the management support in different institutions. When the management support also came in and said, let's adopt blended teaching and learning where we can be able to teach some aspects online, some aspects in person, and then they provided resources. Some of the barriers that we were talking about before here kind of phased out. Barriers of connectivity, barriers of devices, because now we were intentional in terms of budgeting. So these barriers are only there because we are not intentional in budgeting. Our governments can be able to budget for these devices and they can be able to extend electricity to where there is no electricity. So after they realize that this is an alternative approach to teaching and learning and it requires electricity, it requires devices and so on, we are now increasingly seeing governments coming in, institutions coming in to set up infrastructure that is needed for e-learning. So we are seeing infrastructure like learning management systems being installed in different universities. We are seeing collaborations coming in. I'm happy that I have somebody here from Arizona State University. We have a very big collaboration with Arizona State University in the e-learning initiative, which is supported by the MasterCard Foundation. So there are so many initiatives that are coming in to support this, and this is exciting the university as much as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. We should move on to the ambassador and get her perspective from the governmental sector.
Thank you, Curtis. At the government level, I think the debate is about jobs for the future. How do we adapt, and what does it take to adapt? Adaptation in terms of teaching, in terms of the teachers, adaptation in terms of technology, what technology we require in order to fit in to this digital age. And I think there is also the reluctance at policy level to admit that education has changed. And we now need to move to skills-based education to really emphasize skills versus these second-class certificates and all that we have always given high regard to. I think the one other area is, how do you create, because the policy implementers are us, the civil servants, how do you create an agile civil service that can create an agile state? Because that retraining of the civil service and that retraining of the different arms of government is necessary if you want to create an agile state that reacts, that adapts very fast. Employability is being talked about quite a lot. Getting people market ready or labor force ready is also some of the areas that we have been talking about. And I think the issue now is really, how do we catch up? What does it take to catch up? And how brave are we to bite the bullet and catch up?
Thank you. All excellent answers, but I want to know more. So I have a follow-up question for Rebecca, and then we'll go to Punya's question. Rebecca has been a leader in the e-learning space for decades because she organizes people. She gets people to come to summits and institutes and conferences. When I first met her 21 years ago at Online Educa Berlin, I literally had dinner with her after flying in, and I fell asleep while eating and talking. So I have an apology to you, Rebecca. For 21 years, I've been waiting to apologize for that. I was so exhausted.
I must have been very, very boring.
I was so exhausted coming in. I was literally analyzing my data on the plane for my keynote. So she runs Online Educa Berlin, which is the largest e-learning conference in the world. And it's half higher ed, or a K-12 and higher, and half corporate training, at least it was at the time. So she's involved in all sectors. And then she got Online Educa into Madrid or Spain, and also events in Korea and Latin America and Singapore and the Arab world. I mean, her influence is worldwide. And so when I emailed her this past couple of weeks, I said, why eLearn Africa? And she had an answer for me. I won't tell you what her answer was, but I would like her to talk about what gets her excited about holding events in Africa, and in general, what you see transpiring within these annual conference spaces and why you do it.
Well, generally, I mean, why I do it is because I started doing, sometimes I ask myself why I do it, because it's horribly exhausting organizing these conferences, and I'm getting older. So you say we met 21 years ago, I thought it was 10 years ago, but time flies. But it is, I mean, it's very, very hard work, but it is, and a lot of people would, but that's what I started doing, and I loved it when I was young, and what I loved was bringing people together and giving other people the platform, and you often have the sage on the stage, you have all these incredible experts in the audience. So what we always try to do is also have very interactive sessions where you get some real beauty, some jewels in the audience who have so much knowledge. But what people say or have said, especially during COVID, also before, if you remember 21 years ago, this was before LinkedIn, this was before Facebook, this was before the way we were connected today. And in those days, you needed conferences because you weren't necessarily, I mean, maybe you'd be a member of an association, maybe you'd get some newsletter, but you didn't know what the latest trends were unless you went to a conference at the end of the year to find out what the latest killer application was. That's where the news came out. Since We are so interconnected. We find out about the latest trends immediately because we read all, the different journals, etc. So we know what's going on. We don't need to go to a conference anymore to find out what's happening. We can find out anything online. We can find, so why do you still need to go to a conference? And then during COVID, you had all these online conferences and people said, well, it's going to kill conferences. Why you need to go to conferences? Because, well, first of all, the way I organize eLearning Africa, we organize it as a team, me and a team, and I wouldn't be able to do this without the team, is that you have very many different sessions of very many different topics. So it's not just a small one parallel session conference. It's a huge conference where you can learn cross-sectoral, cross-discipline, where you learn all these different things. And the other thing is, it's you learn differently online than in a conversation. The things you get to know in a conversation, the serendipity of meeting someone on the coffee break, the personal connection, meeting someone, getting on with that person, and those conversations, that's what inspires us. When you're in a conference session, as long as you're not looking at your phone, and that's why you try to also make them interactive so that that people are not just looking at their emails, is you get involved. You learn differently when you get involved. You're not just a passive user. And so this is why conferences still work and why I love, so I started with Online Educa Berlin. I sold that a few years ago. I'm still involved. I'm still the conference chair, but I sold that to a company who's doing a great job. And you might remember my colleague Astrid, she's the director of that. And I loved Online Educa because it's a global conference. You have people from all over the world. And I love the different editions. Each country, each let's say continent as such, has its strong points and weak points. With the one in the Middle East, they have access to the internet, they have electricity, they have a lingua franca, they can share. With Africa, it's more exciting because there's so much more happening. There's so much innovation happening. Innovation because of a need. So even in the first eLearning Africa conference, there were innovation happening there that was then copied in the rest of the world. I remember the teacher associations using SMS to connect with their teachers, text messages. But what is wonderful about Africa, and that's unique, I think there's no continent that is like Africa, is that Africans like each other. I mean, of course, you might make jokes. Ugandans might make jokes about Kenyans or maybe Tanzanians, and Paul can tell us more about that. The Ugandans love making jokes, by the way, and they make jokes about their own president. But they're very, very united. They work together, even though, in the Arab world, you've got a lingua franca of Arabic, but the Africans, they're very collaborative with each other. And also it's the fun, the engagement, people get involved. We started the eLearning Africa debate, and that's where Iffy and Paul, by the way, spoke brilliantly this last edition. We have a closing parliamentary style debate, which we started in 2009 because we always needed a closing session at eLearning Africa because it's more formal, because the government's involved. It also has a ministry roundtable. And usually in a closing session of a conference, people are tired. Very few people are there. It's often sort of, official talks. And so we thought, well, we need to do this closing session because the government wants us to do it. But what we'll do is we'll have a kind of parliamentary style debate with with a motion that you can really argue well over. And I tell you, the fire that it sparks there, people get involved, especially the Nigerians, but people really start arguing and then we did it for Berlin. And in Berlin, we had to introduce alcohol because without the alcohol, people were very quiet and they didn't really get involved. So Africa is a passionate continent, it's a beautiful continent, the people are fantastic. And what's happening there is brilliant. And the innovation that's happening there, it's just fun. I just enjoy it immensely. And I think anybody who has anybody who goes to Africa gets the African bug and loves it too.
Rebecca, on this show, announce the next show. Where will it be so our listeners can find out where and when will it be?
It'll be in Tanzania, in Dar es Salaam, at the beginning of May, I think 7th to 9th of May in Dar es Salaam.
2025.
2025, yeah.
Okay.
And it's already been it took place in Uganda in 2014. So it's been to many countries. It has not been to Nigeria. It should go to Nigeria because Nigeria, as they say in Nigeria, if somebody sneezes in Nigeria, the rest of Africa gets a cold. It's so powerful, and there's so much happening on the continent. And one day I hope it'll go to Zimbabwe because that's where actually one of the first countries I visited when I was young, when I was a student. I did a paper on media studies in Zimbabwe when I was in my early 20s. And it's also a beautiful country, and I hope one day it'll take place there as well.
You heard it right here. Breaking news in Silver Line for Learning, or Dar es Salaam. Does Punya go next, or Chris?
I can go next. So I'm just looking at the time, so I'm going to change my question somewhat. So my original question was really about, when we talk about Africa, even when, like, for instance, I'm originally from India. When we talk about India, there are so many different Indias even within India. So solutions that work in one context don't work in another. And so my question was going to be more about sort of the variation within, because when we talk about Africa as if it's like one thing, well, it's not. It's many different things. But given time, and Rebecca, sort of building on what you said about sort of these innovations that are sort of emerging from the ground up, and in some ways, Silver Lining for Learning as a series has always been about that, has always been about identifying and recognizing these kinds of innovations that are happening. So maybe what I would love to hear from each of you, something that has been inspiring or something that has really, I know Iffy, you spoke about one example from your own experience, but I'd love to hear from the others about something that's giving you sort of inspiration or hope in terms of like some kind of an innovation that's happening on the ground level that you think deserves to be recognized more widely. And, we can go in any sequence, but maybe start with you, Ambassador, and then, anybody can jump in. Something that you feel is like, oh, this is exciting and there is a lot of potential there.
One of the things that I took away from e-learning Africa was teachers should be at the center of all innovations in e-learning, and that teachers' curriculum should include
Did we lose the ambassador?
I think we've lost Ambassador.
Yeah. Okay, well, oh, there you are. Ambassador, we lost you for a second. So could you just repeat what you just said? Sorry.
Okay, I was just saying that it was one of the things I took away from the e-learning Africa was teachers should be at the center of all innovations rather than policymakers, and that all teacher training should be should include e-learning and educational technology. I have been to 5 universities since my e-learning meeting in Rwanda. I've been to 5 universities in Zimbabwe. And the first thing I ask is, do you have a course in educational technology? What are the teachers learning? And also looking at where is e-learning? Where is the place? What is the place for e-learning in all your efforts? And so I am really pushing this agenda so that it gets mainstreamed. It's not just an alternative where we say, oh, we will do things hybrid. It's not an alternative. It is the way that will ensure that we teach as many people and we reach as many people as possible. So that's really something that I am taking away. And it is something that is being done in many of the African countries. And I learned a lot about it at the e-learning conference.
Thank you. Paul?
Yeah, yes, I think, yeah, we've been in this area for some time, and we are creating a lot of innovations that are working not only in our higher education institutions, but also for community support. So for us, for example, in the area of mobile learning, where I did my PhD, we have developed frameworks for supporting mobile app developers to develop applications that are innovative for teaching and learning different communities. One of the most interesting application that we have developed is an application for enhancing the behavioral change of border riders in Uganda. Now, border riders, for those of you who are not aware, these are commercial motorcyclists that ride on Kampala streets and everywhere in the country. And they do have a behavior problem. They don't follow rules, they don't follow anything. So we tried to organize for them training sessions, in-person training sessions. They can't come because they feel they're busy. So we had then to use technology-mediated solutions through designing applications that are using mobile devices, because these guys are always staged on border stages. And these are so as they are there waiting for the next customer, we do give them some education using this technology, the mobile devices. So for me, that is quite inspiring, an application that I am actually the head of, and I originated it, and it is helping. And many of the border riders are actually telling us testimonies that, yes, I didn't know this, I didn't know this, I didn't know this. But it has helped us reach out to all these guys wherever they are, not only in cities, but also in rural areas. So to me, that is quite an inspiring application for e-learning that I am actually infusing to the community, and it is indeed working out very, very well. So that is the inspiration for me.
Thank you. Iffy and then Rebecca, and let's keep it short because I think Chris has a question he'd like to follow up and we are tight on time.
Okay, Rebecca, would you like to come first?
Yeah, I mean, my answer is simple. I mean, because I see it from a different view as you. What I do is I convene people together. We bring everybody who's doing something across the continent together. So there's so many new innovations. It's wonderful. During the conference, we have a call for papers. So we're privy to all these, and I think for the last conference we had over 400 submissions. And so you see a lot of innovation, and these are also then put into the program. What is great to see, and what has been something that's been growing the last few years, is the African EdTech startups. Mostly mobile, obviously, because Africa is mainly mobile. So there's some brilliant startups there that are doing creating solutions across the board for different types of contexts. And of course, then and at eLearning Africa, we also have a big exhibition. We also have the global vendors. We have Moodle who participate, and Moodle is very much used across African universities. But we also try to involve the African EdTech startups that are creating solutions for their own context. They understand their own context. They understand the needs of local languages, teaching in local languages. So that's where as far as I'm concerned, there's a huge amount of innovation going or happening. But there's so many to say, so I can only invite all three of you, by the way, to join us next year. You have an open invitation, and I hope you come and see it for yourself, because there's so much happening, and you have so much fun as well. If you go ahead.
Okay. Yes, talking about eLearning Africa, that was a huge platform for me and my company. Actually, we exhibited our latest digital product at eLearning Africa. Thank you for the platform. It was great to to actually share something we're working on currently. It's EdGiggle. It's an educational app for teachers' digital upskilling, and it does not just provide the digital upskilling to teachers. It also creates opportunities for them, financial, career, and opportunities that will motivate them to stay as lifelong learners. So it's our latest invention and solution, and we hope to drive this and make this scale to African educators in general. And I believe that this will set a pace for other sectors, because there is nothing as great as creating opportunities for professional development and career advancement opportunities. These two goes hand in hand for every economy. Thank you.
So I know we're short on time, and this isn't a question all four of you need to answer, but we will have viewers of this episode who are in different parts of the world who might say, wow, I want to do something like this in my region, my continent, or my subcontinent. What advice would you have for someone based on the successful model that you've developed?
Which model are you talking about? Are the individual models that each one of us developed, or?
No, I'm talking about the sort of continent-wide e-learning discussion that we're having.
So to organize a kind of a community of practice through an annual meeting. Oh, right. That's basically it's so when I had the idea, the first thing is you just research who's who in the continent. And the thing is, though, if I look at when I started in '95 in Berlin, there were very few conferences around. There are quite a few in the States. That some of them don't exist anymore, some of them do. But if you look at the landscape now, there's so many conferences across the world. When I did one in Singapore, I mistakenly thought that Singapore could act as a hub for the whole of Asia. Doesn't really. Africa is a little bit different in that respect. But also when I started, and we had a scholarship scheme because conferences did not necessarily take place. Well, if they took place in Africa, they took place in South Africa. If there's an international kind of global Pan-African conference, either in South Africa or it might have been in Nairobi, but mainly UN conferences took place in other countries. I did one in Benin in 2012. I think only the UN organized conferences there. And we started off also with a scholarship scheme because we knew that people working in academia or in schools wouldn't have the money to fly in for a conference. I mean, just airline travel across Africa is very, very expensive, let alone pay for accommodation or pay for the conference scheme. So I spent a lot of time trying to raise funds to support participation. And sometimes it was great and sometimes it wasn't so great because the money wasn't necessarily available. But it was building that. And then you have to make sure that, I mean, it's also in a way, it's like show business. You're only as good as your last show. But it's just making sure that and that's what you said at the beginning, Chris, is bringing all the different types of stakeholders together. You can also just do a purely academic conference. It's challenging. It's not easy. It's challenging. It's hugely expensive. People always think that organizing something in Africa is going to be cheaper than the rest of the world. In fact, it's more expensive than doing something in a European capital. The internet, for example, in Kigali cost me 30,000 euros just for 3 days internet. Elsewhere in Budapest, I've got a conference in Budapest in November. I get the same internet for free. So, but I think it's basically working with multipliers, getting the stakeholders involved, and spreading the word. It's about marketing, spreading the word, and just being passionate about it. Some very good ambassadors as well. But I mean, if somebody's interested in how to organize a conference, I can definitely tell them what my ingredients are. But I think there's not enough time in this to do it. So anybody who's interested can contact me via email. But I'd always say do something that doesn't exist. So I would not go into a market. There was no conference in Africa at the time when I went. And many said to me, "Why are you doing this? You're not African." And I said, "Well, this is what I do, and I do it everywhere in the world. But nothing's stopping you from doing it either." So and there's room for many conferences. There's room for many different meetings. Yeah.
And so you're doing it all, and we're really impressed with. I was really impressed with Online Educa, and I'd like to go to eLearn Africa someday. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Iffy. Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you, Rebecca. What a marvelous show, and it was great to have you. I'm glad I could get in today. My fan died, apparently. The next show is going to build on this, maybe, because we're going to talk about adult learners and how University of Illinois at Springfield has been able to maintain its enrollment in this age of the demographic cliff. They embraced blended learning, and we're trying to put every course in a blended format 20 years ago, and they've been a shining light or model for the rest of the world in terms of how to do blended, but much more than that. So we have 3 people who've run teaching and learning centers at Springfield, as well as in the provost's office, who will enlighten us on July 13th at 11 a.m. Eastern Time for episode 198 of Silver Lining for Learning. See you then.